This is the cover of the book. It is a beautiful book and a beautiful cover. We have it in the Pasadena Public Library, and you can put it on hold to be picked up at your favorite location. So I'm sure you join me saddened by the news, actually the devastating news of the closure of Pasadena Central Library due to the seismic retrofit study. We were all very surprised by it, and we're just fortunate that we have other branches. We have 9 other branches, and 8 of those branches will be opened shortly. 2 are currently opened right now, Hastings and La Pintoresca, and other ones will be opened up over the next 2 weeks. If you want any information about the hours, you can go to the Pasadena Public Library website and see the hours for all of our locations. So we thank you for your continual support of Pasadena Public Library, and we're going to be moving our collections out of Central, planning to where they'll go so that we can continue to serve our community exactly how we have served everyone before. So Pasadena Public Library is celebrating Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. But before I actually start that, I want to remind you about optimal zooming. So for optimal zooming enjoyment, if you could please mute yourself. Looks like everybody's already done that. You're all so used to Zooming already by now. Been doing it for more than a year. Leslie has very nicely agreed to allow us to record the event to be put on Pasadena Public Library's YouTube channel. Your names, any of your photos, nothing will be shown in the recording put on the website for Pasadena Public Library YouTube. At the end of the program, there is chat. Leslie is going to be doing chat with us for approximately 15 minutes or until we finish the questions. And if you could please put them into chat, they will be private with me, and then I will ask the chats. So I want to remind you that we have lots of wonderful programs for Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. If you go to our website, you can see one of our sliders. Click on the one for Asian American Pacific Islander Month, and you can see all of the wonderful programs that we have. I know you know how to sign up because you've signed up for today, and I hope you will consider some of our other programs. So before, I know you're anxious to have Leslie talk to you and tell you about his wonderful book, but I have a few more things that I want to tell you. So this month is recognizing the contributions and influence of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders to the history, culture, and achievements of the United States, with a series of virtual programs, events, and activities for all ages at the Pasadena Public Library. At this time, as you know, it is more important than ever to celebrate all of these accomplishments by Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. The month of May was designated as the Heritage Month, and it was chosen to commemorate the immigration of the first Japanese to the United States on May 7, 1843, and to mark the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad on May 10, 1869. So we have lots of history to this Heritage Month. So our author, Lysley Tenorio, is the author of the novel, The Son of Good Fortune, that was published July 2020, last year during the pandemic. And he will talk about how publishing during a pandemic, how difficult it is. And he's also the author of the story collection, Mantras, that was published January 2012. It's a collection of stories about the Filipino communities of California and the Philippines. And Montrose was named a Book of the Year by the San Francisco Chronicle. Leslie is the recipient of a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, a Whiting Award, a Stegner Fellowship, the Edmund White Award, and the Roan Prize from the American Academy of Arts. and letters, as well as residencies from the MacDowell Colony, Yaddo, and the Boglisko Foundation. Lots of wonderful awards. His stories have appeared in The Atlantic, Zoetrope All Story, and Plowshares, and have been adapted for the stage by the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco and the Mayi Theater in New York City. I'm sure we can hear about more how they've been adapted for the stage in his presentation or in the chat. He was born in the Philippines, raised in San Diego. He lives in San Francisco currently, and he is a professor at St. Mary's College. So, The Son of Good Fortune is an immersive and character-driven story about the harsh realities of being an undocumented immigrant in the U.S. Lysley brilliantly narrates how the paranoia of being discovered for fear of deportation affects families and the children of these immigrants while struggling to survive. So at this time, it just gives me great pleasure to be able to welcome Lysley Tenorio to one of our programs for Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Welcome, Lysley.
Thanks so much, Christine. Thanks everyone for coming. This is a nice, intimate audience, and I appreciate all of you making the time. Just some quick thank yous. Thank you to Mike Shea for connecting me with the Pasadena Public Library, and again to Christine for inviting me and for moderating and hosting. And thanks to the library for recognizing Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. It's quite a mouthful, all those words. But it's nonetheless really important, I think, especially in times like these when, we're all having a really challenging time, but it's been especially difficult in specific ways for Asian and Asian American Pacific Islander individuals in this country. I think the violence and the suspicions that have been brought against them during this difficult time, I think all of that is just evidence of how important visibility is. And I'll talk a little bit about that idea of visibility, because that very much has to do with my work and the reason I write. But what I thought I would do was, well, let's just first talk about maybe how I arrived at becoming a writer. I was telling Christine earlier that, when I was growing up, as a child of immigrants, as an immigrant myself, I wasn't necessarily encouraged to pursue a life in the arts. And I think a lot of immigrants and children of immigrants aren't always directed, to pursue those things because, it's always a risk trying to pursue any artistic endeavor. There are no guarantees. And yet it's a really important and necessary and valid educational route and really life route to pursue the arts, because if you can represent all sorts of experiences that way, these populations who need representation become more, they can claim their spot in the culture, and that's something that I always think about with my own work. So I thought I would talk about a little bit about how I got to writing, and then I'll talk a little bit about the book, Son of Good Fortune. It's the follow-up to my collection of stories, Monstrous. And I'll read a little bit from the novel and hopefully have a conversation with all of you. It's always my favorite part of presentations, so I would welcome and appreciate any questions. First, I thought though I'd begin with just how I became a writer. Growing up, I should say that the public library meant a lot to me. I grew up in Mira Mesa, this little suburb in San Diego. And every Wednesday, which was half day at my elementary school, every Wednesday my dad would pick me up, and that was my week to go to the public library and get my books for the week. So I always grew up an avid reader, but it never really occurred to me to write. I think like a lot of young people in college, you arrive not necessarily knowing what you want to do, and I certainly was in that situation. But I remember it was my junior year at UC Berkeley. I had to take a class called the English 180E, the History of the Short Story. It was a graduation requirement. That's the only reason I took it. But it was taught by a woman named Bharati Mukherjee. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly, her first name, an Indian American writer who wrote fiction. And I remember taking her class and realizing, oh, my professor wrote a book. I've never met a real published writer in my life. So I thought, hey, why not check out her books? And so I picked up a book of stories by Bharati Mukherjee called The Middleman. And it's a collection of stories about contemporary immigrant life. And I remember reading one of the stories. It was late at night in my very cold Oakland apartment. And I came across this character named Blanquita, and she was Filipina, and I realized that was the very first time I'd encountered a Filipino character in American fiction. And I remember thinking, I must have been 20 years old, maybe 21 years old at the time, and I remember thinking, I have been reading since I was, 4 or 5. It's a lot of years to be reading, and within that time, I had never seen a Filipino character. And that's not to say that they weren't out there, but in my experience, I just didn't know they existed in American narratives. And I realized that was such an absence. That was a clear invisibility that I was oblivious to for so many years. And I thought, as the child of immigrants, as an immigrant myself, my father served in the US Navy, and that's how he was able to bring us from the Philippines to the States. I remember thinking, I have been invested in the American reality for a long time. Filipinos have been invested in the American reality for a long time. Literally, they've been here for hundreds of years, and yet we remain so invisible in the culture, in literary culture, popular culture on TV and movies. And reading this story with a Filipino character really kind of just lit the fire under my pants. And even though I'd never had any inclination to write, I thought, I want to give this a try. I've always liked reading. I've liked stories. I like telling stories. What would happen if I actually tried telling stories on the page? And what would happen if I tried writing stories about people like me, about immigrants, Filipino American citizens? What if they had stories of their own? What if they became the story? And that really, really motivated me to write. It's what got me to, I was going to say to my computer, but back then it was a word processor. Once I made that commitment, I started taking creative writing classes. And while clearly writers do not have to take creative writing classes to become writers, it was the first time where I was with other like-minded people who wanted to, pursue this kind of strange hobby, right? Let's all write short stories. But it was such an inspiring and challenging and just really pivotal experience to be in a creative writing class. I'm looking at the chat. I'm seeing some of my own students here. Hey guys. I teach creative writing now. So in many ways, I feel like I've come full circle, and I feel very lucky to be teaching creative writing. But taking those creative writing classes and having that inspiration from Bharati Mukherjee and having this motivation to want to, represent and really insist. I think a lot of my writing is about insisting on the acknowledgement of my presence or of the presence of people like me. So really that was the motivation for writing. And what I realized is when you as a human being have something that, is of utmost concern to you, if it's an obsession, sometimes that's the thing that gets you to write. Or if you're a painter, it's the thing that gets you to paint or to write a song or to write a script. For me, I felt very almost politically motivated to write these stories. Now, the consequence of that was I was putting politics at the forefront of the work. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being a political writer. But what was happening was I was writing stories with a kind of message, with like a political slogan almost. And I remember one time I was taking a creative writing class, I think this was in graduate school, where my teacher literally would underline what he called thesis statements. I met with him in his office and he said, "You have thesis statements in your writing." And I thought, okay, is that a bad thing? And for creative writing, if you're trying to write short stories or poetry or novels, I think thesis statements can be a bad thing. I think it was at that point where I realized I can't control how readers might interpret my work. So I don't need to worry about making sure they get my political message or some kind of moral that I'm trying to convey. What I really need to prioritize is the story, because it's stories that are universal. It's stories that draw people in, and the hope is as you draw a reader in, hopefully they pick up on the particularities and the specifics of your characters and the experiences of those characters. So even though I had this very strong motivation that was rooted in my insistence on acknowledgement of the presence of Filipinos and of immigrants, I sort of had to maybe kind of step back from that and start treating my characters as individuals. I think the hardest thing, at least as a writer, the hardest thing to do is to write a character. When you're trying to write a character, you're essentially trying to create as complex a human being as possible. And nothing in this planet is more complex than a human being. So there's only so much you can do to try to emulate that on the page. Nonetheless, as I began writing more, I learned to really recommit myself to this idea of a character's individual story, in the hopes that these individual stories hopefully resonate with some of my larger concerns. And those concerns are, very much rooted in my own immigrant experience. What does home mean? What does family mean? What does it mean to want to set out and pursue your own individual destiny when you feel the pull of familial or collective history, tugging at you from behind? Those are concerns that I've always had as a human being, and they're the concerns that I have as a writer. My job, I think, is to try to translate those concerns into as individualized stories and characters as possible. So that's how I got to writing. And I think, I know a lot of parents, I think especially a lot of immigrant parents, have a lot of concerns over their kids' educational choices, and that makes total sense. But I think I lucked out. I'm the youngest of 5, and we're all about 5 years apart. So I think by the time I came around, my parents were pretty hands-off. I think they kind of trusted me to know what I was doing, even though I didn't really know what I was doing. So I didn't have this pressure to not pursue an art. But I do know I've had students, immigrant students, students who are the children of immigrant parents, who have come to my office and said, I really love creative writing. I really want to pursue this. I don't think my parents are going to support this kind of endeavor. And I can understand that. And there are no guarantees of employment or a paycheck whenever you pursue an art. But my hope is, at least based in my experience, I think this can be true. My hope is that even if it doesn't necessarily become your career in terms of your paycheck, I think pursuing an art is always a valid choice educationally and just in terms of your life. So for anyone out there who might be listening now or might be watching this later, as a recording on the Pasadena Public Library website, I hope maybe that's one thing that they can take from this, is that there is a viable route into making any kind of art an integral part of your life. But you have to commit to it, and you have to, as difficult as it might be, you have to find a way to love it. I think that's the only way I was able to commit to writing and to get these books out into the world. So anyway, that's my story in terms of becoming a writer. What I thought I'd do now, though, is talk about this book, The Son of Good Fortune. This is my novel that came out July 2020 in the midst of the pandemic. Not the best timing, but I feel very lucky that it's out in the world and that it's finding its readers. This is a story about a young man named Excel. He's Filipino, he's 19 years old, and he is undocumented. His mother, named Maxima, is also undocumented. The two of them live in Colma, California, which is just outside San Francisco. It's a little town most famous for its cemeteries, where the dead literally outnumber the living. There are about 17 cemeteries in Colma, so it is really one of the town's primary industries. So Excel and Maxima are this mother-son duo. They kind of have a bit of a fraught relationship. Excel certainly has resentments for being brought to the States as an infant and to grow up in an undocumented life. Maxima has her own unique story as well. She is a former B-action movie star in the Philippines. At a certain point in the book, she says that she should have been the Filipino Michelle Yeoh. So she is someone who has these unrealized dreams and aspirations. And she does what she can to make ends meet. Obviously, as an undocumented person, there's so many job opportunities available to her. So her way of earning money without having to do work that she would rather not do, like cleaning people's houses or, collecting tin cans on the street, things like that. She has become something of an internet scam artist. What she basically does, I guess it's a form of catfishing. She goes on these websites and meets lonely American men and dupes them into falling in love with her. And eventually, when the time is right, she convinces them to send her money. Excel is clearly unhappy with this arrangement, but also knows that his own possibilities are limited because he's undocumented. And so he has this opportunity to leave Colma and move to this off the grid desert town called Hello City, where he hopes to reinvent himself. And the story picks up it's about 9 months after he's been in this off the grid desert town. Certain things have led to another, and he finds himself back in Colma. He has a $10,000 debt to pay for various reasons, and he realizes that he needs to go back home to try to make that money. And eventually he realizes he may even have to team up with Maxima and pull off a scam with her in order to make this money back. What I thought I would do was just read the prologue. You don't need a lot of context. It features Maxima and hopefully gives you a sense of what her character is like. And I'll read that. It shouldn't be too long. And hopefully after that, I can take some questions and have a conversation. So thanks for listening. All right, this is the prologue. Maxima in the dark, half lit by a Virgin Mary nightlight and the glow of a screensaver, a slow motion sweep of stars and planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Earth. Dressed in denim cutoffs and a Mickey Mouse t-shirt, she doesn't shiver despite her wide open bedroom window and the cold night beyond. She sits at the foot of her bed, cleaning her nails with the tip of a switchblade. May bakas ka bang nakikita sa aking muka, she sings. Like all her favorite Filipino love songs, this one is about heartbreak. An alarm goes off. The clock glows red, 10:10 p.m. She closes the switchblade. Maxima stands and stretches, takes quick jabs at the air, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, then flips on the desk lamp and sits, turns on the ball-shaped webcam atop her monitor. A tap to the space bar and the galaxy vanishes. Now her face fills the screen. Using it as a mirror, she puts on maroon lipstick and dabs of the Kleenex, smiles wide to check her feet. To check her teeth, sorry. She undoes her ponytail and shakes out her hair, a long black wave, then turns her face from side to side, searching for her best angle. She could easily pass for 30, but is somewhere in her 50s. Her true age, she swears, is a mystery, even to herself. Her eyes closed and her fingertips on the keyboard, she whispers to herself so softly that a person standing next to her would have no hope of knowing what she says. She takes a deep breath and slow breath, opens her eye. She takes a deep and slow breath, opens her eyes, types and clicks until another browser window opens. There's a man on the screen. My love, he says. No, she says, in Tagalog. Sorry, he says. Hello, mahal. That's better, she says, then blows him a kiss. She leans into the screen. Oh, mahal, he says. Please don't tease. It's been a lousy few days. Ano ba, she says. What happened, Henry? Oh, where to start? He removes his glasses, the stubbly flab of his cheeks moving up and down as he rubs his temples. He pours a shot of Jack Daniels into a coffee mug and recounts his terrible week. More layoffs at the plant and all the guys blame him. His ex-wife trashed the Miami timeshare and won't pay for repairs. And just today, an invitation to his high school reunion, my freaking 40th, he says, arrived in the mail. But the real downer, he says, is the weather. End of spring and I'm still shoveling snow. Snow, snow, snowy, snowy, snow, Maxima says in a made-up tune. She puts her elbows on the desk, rests her chin on her clasped hands. My whole life, she says, I never see snow. Come to America, he says. Come to North Dakota. One day, she says, if God is good. God is always good, he says. He pours another shot, doesn't drink. Come closer. I want your face to fill my screen. Maxima leans into the webcam, so close she could kiss it. He says that she's the most beautiful woman he has ever seen. These past 3 weeks of talking online, he says, are the best he's had in years. A twice divorced balding white guy on the edge of 60 doesn't hope for much, but when he found her profile on goodcatholicfilipinas.com and saw that her favorite food was sweet and sour chicken, that her favorite singer was Shania Twain, and that her lifelong dream was to live in joy with a good man in God's country, he convinced himself to send her a message. I know it's silly to reminisce, he says, but life before you seems so long ago. I didn't realize how lonely I was. I was lonely too, she says. And I think that maybe, well, probably that I might be, he takes a deep breath, falling in love with you. Pulls away from the screen. I'm sorry, he says. Too much too soon? She shakes her head. Not too soon, Mahal. I think maybe that I am falling in love with you too. With me, he says. Maxima laughs. Yes, with you, tanga. Tanga? It means stupid, she says. He lets out a breath and slaps his chest twice. My heart, it's racing. Heart, she says. In Tagalog, puso. Puso, he writes the word down. That means heart, got it. Soon you'll speak Tagalog, Maxima says, and then you visit me in the Philippines, diba? Or you visit me first. Maybe you can be my date to the reunion. Henry sets the scene. He enters his high school gym to the tune of his old prom song, We've Only Just Begun by the Carpenters. And though he hasn't aged as well as his classmates, there's no question that he has the sexiest, most gorgeous woman in the room on his arm. The other women are jealous of her, the men envious of him, and the bullies from his freshman year just stand to the side, giving him the thumbs up. And the whole night, he says, you and I just dance. He leans into his webcam. When can we meet, he says. Philippines to America, she says, not so easy trip. The lines in Manila for passports and visas take hours, sometimes days, she says, and never mind the near zero chances of government approval. Their best hope for being together is to pray, to keep faith in God, and to wait. And when I come to North Dakota, she says, will you show me the snow? Count on it. Okay, but one condition only, she says, I don't shovel. Henry laughs, which makes Maxima laugh, harder and harder until she's hunched over and her laughter becomes gasps for air. Mahal, he says, are you okay? She shakes her head, takes a breath, and says it's nothing, then keels over again. It's definitely not nothing, he says. What's wrong? She looks straight at the camera. I'm hurt. Hurt? Hurt where? She clears her throat and takes a breath. Don't worry, Henry, it's nothing, okay? Stop saying that. Just tell me what's wrong. She looks at him for a moment, as though wondering if he can be trusted with something as private as pain. If that's what you want, Mahal, she says, okay. She stands up and lifts her shirt slowly, adjusting the camera to make sure that he sees, then turns in a slow circle to reveal a wound, a crusty gash that spans from the top of her hip to the middle of her abdomen. She explains, it happened in the typhoon 2 months before. A snap of bamboo, sharp as a spear, sliced across her body in the high velocity winds. I lost so much blood, she says, but I'm thinking, okay, Long, it's just the cut, bahala na. Pero now I have an infection. Her own grandmother, she tells him, died from an infected wound, but God's good grace will keep her alive, she's sure of it. She lowers her shirt and sits, but every day it hurts. What can I do, Henry says, how can I help? Oh, I hate this. I hate being so far away from you. Before Maxima can speak, he says that maybe the day to meet should come sooner than later. What if this is God and the universe telling them that he should be the one to fly to her? And depending on the current round trip airfare from Grand Forks to Manila, now's the time to come together. But Maxima says no, and that for now, all she needs are his love, faith, and prayers, nothing else. But there's one thing, she says. Tell me, he says, medicine, ointments and creams with all of the antibiotics. The best hospital in Manila has them, pero walang pera. Walang pera? No money, she says. There's never money. Well, Henry says, how much do you need? Bahala na mahal, it's okay. Please don't worry about me. How much? Tell me. No, she says, I can't accept. I'm too ashamed. Just tell me, he says, please. She takes a deep breath and nods. 22,000 pesos. Pesos, he says. How much is that? $400. She turns her back toward the camera. USD. $400, he says. Then he says nothing. $400. Henry says nothing, just listens. Half the money's for the doctor, she explains, the other half for the medicine. In the Philippines, if you have no insurance, medical care is very expensive. It's almost impossible talaga. It's not like in the States. Maxima dabs her eyes with her pinky, and with her other hand safely out of camera view, she reaches for the switchblade next to her computer. She flicks it open and twirls it between her fingers, a thing she does when she's anxious or uncertain, or when the inevitable is on the edge of finally happening. On screen, Henry is motionless. His face is a blank. Mahal, she says, are you there? Finally, Henry moves. I'm here, he says. Sorry, the screen froze for a sec. Where were we? What were you saying? Money, she says, for the medicine. And how much was it? He says. Was it 500? 5, yes, she says, nodding. 500 USD. He looks toward the ceiling and blinks like he's adding up figures in his head. Let's make it 600, okay? 6? Maxima shakes her head, says no, 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 and starts to weep. It's too much, Mahal, too much. Shh, he says, a finger to his lips. There's no price on love, Diba? Diba, yes, she says, that's right. She wipes her eyes with a Kleenex, says it's almost 1 p.m. in the Philippines and time for her to go. She gives quick instructions when and how he can wire money to an online account, tells him that she'll let him know when the payments go through. This will help me so much, Mahal, so much. Thank you, she says. And soon, one day, I promise we will meet. Henry nods. Yes, Mahal. And when we do, we'll sit in the countryside, put on some Shania, and then he leans into his camera, filling her screen again. We're gonna fuck like bunnies. He winks and kisses the air, and the blade spins faster in Maxima's hand. They say goodbye, and Henry signs off, disappears from the screen. But Maxima is still there, and for a moment, she watches herself, tilts her head slightly, like her face is one she recognizes but doesn't quite know. She turns off the webcam. Maxima lifts her shirt and carefully peels away the wound, a trick of rubber and glue, then jots down quick notes in a small spiral notebook. She picks up the switchblade and opens her closet, where, on the inside of the door, she's tacked up a human target, the kind found at a shooting range. She steps back, stands against the opposite wall. She raises the blade, aims, and throws. She misses the heart, not by much. Thanks so much. Happy to take questions if people have any.
Thank you very much, Lysley, for sharing your prologue with us. Your words, your description, absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much. We do have a question in chat from somebody that is a huge admirer of you. And during the Q&A, they'd like you to talk about the influences, both literary and otherwise, that have shaped your work.
Right. Well, as a writer, clearly, I have a lot of literary influences. You know, I said earlier, Wednesday was library day growing up. So that's my big public library day. I'll say quite happily and gratefully that one of my earliest influences was Beverly Cleary, who wrote the Ramona books, Ramona the Pest, Henry Huggins, the Mouse and the Motorcycle. You know, she recently just passed away at, I think,
yes,
103, which I was so sad about. And I think what was so amazing about her work, and something I was aware of even then, even as like a 5 or 6 year old, when I read Ramona the Pest, I knew that she was such a flawed character. And that's why I liked her. And she was drawn in such sharp contrast to these other characters who might have come across as like these perfect students or perfect kids. Ramona was anything but perfect. And a flawed character is always a flawed character is always a more compelling character. And so just realizing that from an early age, that someone who makes mistakes and does bad things, that they can still somehow be redeemed because they're compelling and good people. I took my cues from that. Even years later, when I started writing myself. But I also have non-literary influences too. There is for those who might remember, the Carpenters, a brother-son duo from like the late 60s, early 70s. They're known for really cheesy music, but Karen Carpenter, who was the lead singer, had a really tragic life. She died very young, I think at the age of 30, 33, from anorexia. And if you ever listen to her songs, there's a particular song called Top of the World, which on the surface is just kind of very bouncy and happy. It's a very positive song. But if you really listen to her music and the tenor of it, and you detect this depth and almost this kind of sadness and desperation. And when you contrast that quality of her voice with the kind of upbeat bounciness of the music, it's a really compelling combination. And in many ways, I feel like that's what I'm trying to do with my own fiction. I'm really drawn to stories or plots that seem kind of whimsical on the surface. In my collection of stories, I have there are pieces about the making of a really bad monster movie. There's a story about these guys who try to beat up the Beatles at the Manila International Airport. So on the surface, they're kind of almost silly. And I like the challenge of taking what might be light or breezy and trying to find real emotional substance in there, and even trying to find shades of darkness in those stories, because I think that's what life is. Nothing is ever purely happy, nothing is ever purely sad. There are no pure winners and there are no pure losers. So music like the Carpenters actually kind of taught me that, maybe even before I started writing. So those are some literary and very non-literary influences.
Thank you very much. But how difficult was the writing process for this son of good fortune? What advice would you give to someone who's interested in writing their own words, just like your life influences helped you write your own words?
Right.
But they're actually, if you're having trouble moving forward, did you ever have trouble writing your own influence and your own life story and what you wanted to put on paper?
Writing is always a lot of trouble for me. Writing is really hard. And I've said this before, and I know it sounds strange. Writing does not come naturally to me. I have writer friends who can put out a short story in like a week or 2 weeks, and it's near perfect. It's almost close to publishable. The words don't come as fluently to me as that. And I think that might be because I haven't been writing my whole life. I know writers who started writing when they were like 10. So I really have to work at it. But as difficult as that can be, there's a kind of pleasure in knowing that my work, or my additional work, because I teach full time as well, there's a kind of pleasure in knowing that my work, my night job, let's say, is writing, is creating something out of nothing. And as difficult as it might be, and as lonely as it can be, when I write a paragraph that really sticks, or if I find just the right plot point or just the right words, I feel like I'm high-fiving the air. It's like I've solved this mystery, and I was the only person who could solve it, and I got it. That doesn't necessarily mean the next project or even the next paragraph is going to be any easier, but it's like, I've come this far. I know I can go further. But it is a process. The Son of Good Fortune took me almost probably about 9 years of writing. And when you're working on a book, you are living with that book. These characters were present in my head all the time. And life gets in the way. I lost my mom during the writing of this book. And that was really, really difficult because I was writing about a mother and a son. And to suddenly find myself without my own mom was really hard. And I had to be okay not writing for quite a long time. Sometimes your normal life gets in the way, and that has to be okay. But I also remembered that writing is really important to me, and I eventually found my way back. So for those who want to pursue writing, one of the things that I always try to impart to them, or just let them know, and I think my students know this: writing is work. A lot of it is inspiration. A lot of it is luck and timing. But a lot of it is also labor. And I do mean that, in that when I write a story, or in this case, a novel, I print out that whole thing and I start over from word one. And I'm really thinking about every word and its impact on the sentence and the impact of that sentence on the paragraph, while at the same time trying to manage plot, character development, all these things. There's so much you have to hold in your head. It's okay to do some of it blindly, but there is so much you hold in your head, and you have to trust that you'll find a way to make it work. But it's a lot of work, and it's real labor. And I think that's true with any art. I think when you pursue any art with all seriousness, you're committing to a job. You really are.
So you say that this is your night job. Do you actually do you sit down every night for a certain period of time, and then do you sit, and if you don't write anything or don't think of anything, you just stay there, or do words just flow out and you write them down on the paper? And because you said you printed it out and then you start over again completely.
Right. Yeah, it really varies project to project. So when I'm really immersed in something, or if I've got a deadline, whatever hours I can spare, I'll work, or at least I'll try to work. And often that will happen at night after I'm done teaching, grading, meetings, and things like that. I am, though, most productive when I go away to residencies. You read my bio, and you'd read I've gone to Yaddo and the McDowell Colony and Bogliasco, and these are places that take artists and writers and scholars, and they all work a little differently, but a typical setup is you're given this workspace. Sometimes it's like a studio in the woods. They bring you your lunch at around noon and just kind of like leave you alone, and you have the entire day just to think and write and nap and doodle and take notes. That's where I'm most productive. I don't think I could have written either of my books without that time and space away from my normal life. That sounds horribly entitled, but I am someone who is so easily distracted. If there are dishes in the sink, I'll do the dishes before I start writing. There's some days where, as I said, writing is work, and some days you just want to avoid it, so you'll do anything else. When I have the freedom to just sit and stare out a window and think and write and take notes, I think so much more openly. With the novel, with Son of Good Fortune, I remember, it sounds so hokey, I literally had an epiphany about the book at one of these residencies, and it was pivotal. And I'm convinced I would not have been able to have that realization if I was at home surrounded by my usual clutter. I'm much more productive when I can leave my life for moments.
But you've been very fortunate that you have been able to apply and been accepted by these residencies. I'm sure it's very difficult to get into them. And
Yeah.
You have to apply, and they merit your work and want you to come.
Yeah, and I think if you with writing or with any art, one of the things I did not know before I started writing, and I really learned this when I was in graduate school, I used to think that pursuing an art is super risky and kind of, it can be a really lonely endeavor. And I think that's true for many of us. I didn't know, however, that there are institutions out there who, if they believe in your work, are willing to invest in you. So when I apply to these things, I just kind of cross my fingers and hope I can get a residency or a fellowship. And if I'm lucky enough to find the right reading committee, then I'm given this opportunity. And it makes this pursuit less lonely, and it's validation. When you work on a book, you have no idea if it's going to work out. You have no idea if anyone's going to publish it, or read it. So to have the support of these institutions has been meaningful to me in so many ways, especially during those years when the writing wasn't going very well. I'd apply to something, and if I was lucky enough to get something, it made me feel like, okay, I'm on the right track. I'm not crazy to think that this book is worth writing. So that's been so important to me as a writer, and really just kind of being a literary citizen, being part of a literary and artistic community.
Well, you're definitely a writer, and you're definitely a part of a literary community, and congratulations to you very much for that. But I'm fascinated about the fact that some of your books have been, well, was it The Son of Good Fortune or the stories in Montrose that were adapted by the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco and the Mayi Theater in New York City? Did you help work with them for the stage production?
Right. So the pieces that have been adapted are the stories from Monstrous. I was invited to collaborate when I met with both theater companies. They invited me to really be part of the process, but I realized, that's not my expertise. I don't know how to write for stage, and I just basically said, I like how you talk about my work. I like your vision for the work. So long as you honor the integrity of it. If they're Filipino characters, please don't change them to non-Filipino characters. Um, my only thing was I wanted to make sure that they weren't simply transcribing the stories for the stage, that they were gonna take this as source material, honor it and try to stay true to it, but also infuse it with a different artistic vision. Because otherwise, what's the point? Just read the book. And I think they did that. I think they transformed it. And in fact, one of the stories, Felix Starro, um, by the theater in New York, the Mayi Theater Company, they turned it into a musical. And I remember being there opening night, and lights go down, and I see these amazing actors singing. And as they're singing, I'm realizing they're singing my dialogue. I wrote that dialogue, and they're singing it, and it was so amazing. And they really transformed the story. So to me, it's just this incredible gift that these other artists who are experts in their own fields and so accomplished see potential in my work for some other medium. So it's been awesome.
That would have been very awesome and very exciting to be there that opening night and see your book. It kind of gives you shivers. I
Oh,
think it'd be very, very, very exciting.
it was right off Broadway. I remember being in my taxi on Broadway, and there was the big Harry Potter play, and just down the block, my tiny, the tiny little poster for Felix Starro. But just that we were right there next to each other. These big Broadway productions, and then our little musical was so.
Oh, fabulous. Absolutely wonderful. Well, congratulations. Well, somebody also wants to know, can you recommend any books or authors for the Pasadena Public Library collection? Do you have special books that you recommend to your students at St. Mary's to read?
Yeah, so I teach graduate students as well, and I always try to get them to pick up new work. And I like to support new writers, and I of course love to support my friends who are writers, because we're all just trying to get our books into people's hands. A book I've been recommending lately is called "We Ride Upon Sticks" by a writer named Quan Berry. It's a novel about a girls' field hockey team in the '80s who turned to the occult in order to become state champs. And it takes place near Salem, Massachusetts. And it's funny and sad in parts. And it's anyone who's into like Stranger Things or has that kind of 80s nostalgia should definitely pick it up. A friend of mine named Jack Livings, who wrote a book called The Blizzard Party. It's one of those books that, it's such a feat. I mean, it's a big book. It's about 400 pages, and it all takes place on the surface anyway, the night of the Great Blizzard of '78 in New York City. But it spirals from there and just takes on so many perspectives of different characters, and just the way he's able to manage all these different narrative threads, but really pull them together at the end. It's an epic story, but one that's really grounded in character.
So it's called "We Ride Upon Sticks."
The first one is called We Ride Upon Sticks
Sticks.
by Quan Berry, and the next one is called The Blizzard Party by Jack Livings.
Okay, so we will put those in the chat. The Blizzard Party. Thank you very, very much. And someone has said that they just love Maxima. She's an amazing and unique badass. What people, real or fictional, literary or not, inspired that character? Did you just invent the character? Or do you have an example that you got to know? Or
it was, if you read a lot of immigrant fiction, a common trope is the kind of silent immigrant mother, a very strong immigrant mother, but who's also very, very quiet and reserved. And I grew up with a mother who was very physically strong. I remember one time I was in college and I came home for like a holiday or something. I went upstairs and I saw my dad standing at a second story bedroom window holding a rope, and the rope was like going out the window. I'm like, what are you doing? And I peek in, and my mom has the rope tied around her waist, and she's painting the side of the house. And like, this is a woman in her 60s. I was like, Mom, what are you doing? Get in here. Let me do that. And she wouldn't let me, thank goodness, because I'm actually afraid of heights. But she just went about painting, and I was like, are you MacGyver? What is this? And I really wanted to have a mother in the book who was not only emotionally strong, but physically strong. I wanted that strength embodied physically. And Maxima is such a badass. I think one of the challenges for Excel as her son is, I hope at some point he realizes that the strongest person in his life, emotionally and also physically, is his mother. That's something I think he doesn't quite realize. And I think one of the motivations for the book is to try to get this guy who doesn't really realize all she's done for him and how strong she is in so many ways. So in some ways, she's inspired by my mom.
Well, and of course, writing this book, you spoke about the fact that you lost your own mother during this book. So it was a very emotional time to write this book.
It
very,
was.
Very, very emotional time. So are you working on something else, or can we look forward to another book soon?
Yes, I am sort of in the note-taking research stage of a book that hopefully will be a novel in stories, or what I call the cheater's novel. So I foresee it as a kind of fragmented novel told in distinct parts, distinct stories that somehow fit together thematically. I'd mentioned to you earlier before, I'll be taking next year off for the whole year. So I'm really hoping to make a lot of progress that I wouldn't be able to normally.
Well, we'll look forward to it. I'm sure it's going to be a wonderful book. And I thank you so much for presenting with us today, sharing your beautiful writing and your experiences. And we wish you very well. And everybody is applauding you and thanking you very much for presenting with us and celebrating Asian American Pacific Islander Month. Thank you so much. And we will look forward to your new book.
Thank you so much. Thanks,
well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Thank you so much, Lysley, for presenting to us tonight.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you very, very much. So I think it's so nice. We have Mike Shea, who was a roommate with Lysley at Berkeley. So now they're going to have some time to connect over Zoom.
Yes.
Did you get those books down, Mike, so you can add it to the collection?
I did. We Write on Sticks, Upon Sticks sounds awesome. I can't wait to read that. I don't know if we have it in the collection, but I will make sure we get that one, the Blizzard Party as well. That's great, Lysley.
I'm going to let you visit and chat with each other. I think that's very nice. And I thank you, Lysley, very much for presenting to us tonight. Okay, so I'm going to put myself on mute.
We'll probably hop off of this and we can go on to a different medium. So, but I'm going to give you a call. Do you want to have a quick hangout sesh?
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Absolutely. Cool. You want me to send you a Zoom link?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, I'll send you a Zoom link in about 10 minutes.
Okay, that sounds great. Okay, awesome. Great.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Christine.
Thank you, Tim.
Thanks, Tim.
Bye. Okay, bye.